Hello friends, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. In this video, we will quickly cover a very important topic of the deployment, which is called a deployment plan. So before we go ahead to understand the deployment plan, let me see what exactly is deployment configurations. Okay, so once you are clear on the deployment configurations, then you can probably understand it easily. What is the meaning of deployment plan? Okay, so deployment plan is specifically a term which is related with the deployment. Okay, so whenever we do the deployment of applications, many times we do the deployment of a deployment plan file as well along with the deployment of our application code files. Okay, so now many times we get confused about what exactly this deployment plan is doing along with the deployment of our application code. And many times we get the deployment request for the deployment plan separately. That means we do not deploy the corresponding application. We only deploy a small deployment plan files many times, okay, without the application. So what is deployment configurations? Okay, so deployment configurations for an application is defined in multiple XML documents known as deployment descriptors. Okay, so that are included as part of the application, var, EAR, jar, etc. Okay, so that means whenever we do the deployment of applications, okay, before that, when we do the development of our applications, whether it is a var file, EAR file, jar file, rar file, or some other archive file in Weblogic server, okay, along with the code, along with the class files, library files, we have the configurations in the XML files. That means a lot of configurations apart from the code we defined in the XML file as well. So that means your all jar, var, and EAR archive files come along with the configuration files as well. Okay, so now we have two important files when we talk about in terms of web applications or var applications. Okay, var archive files. So there are two important files in case of var file. Okay, web applications. One is web.xml and second is weblogic.xml. Okay, so application code related descriptors we define in the web.xml file. Okay, and when it is a some specific parameter of WebLogic that we define in weblogic.xml file. For detailed understanding, you can go through the Oracle documentations, or maybe you can search for the web as well to understand the difference between web.xml and weblogic.xml. And then there are a lot of descriptors that developers define in these files. Okay, but the basic difference we can say is that application specific descriptors or parameters we define in web.xml file, and if it is a WebLogic specific parameter, then we can define in weblogic.xml file. Okay, for example, if we in case of an error, we define in code, we define to go for specific error page. We do a lot of session configurations with respect to our applications, whether we do a lot of configurations with respect to the security and login information in the application. So those all parameters we can define in web.xml file. And when we do certain kind of configurations like the configurations of the work manager for applications, configuration of the logging parameters, okay, which is specific to WebLogic, that parameters were defined in weblogic.xml. Apart from that, there are a lot of n number of parameters that we can define in web.xml and weblogic.xml. So this is a basic idea of the descriptors that we define in a XML file, in a configuration file. Okay, now when we talk about the deployment plan, okay, so what exactly is deployment plan? So the first thing is deployment plan is an optional XML file. That means when you're doing a deployment, it may be that you may have the XML file or the deployment plan, but it is not necessary. You may not have the deployment plan. Okay, we will discuss about why it is required and where it is required. So basically, this is a small XML document, a small text file within XML format. Okay, and you should define an application's deployment configurations for a specific WebLogic server environment, such as development, test, or productions. That means in this particular XML file, this is just like a descriptor file where we have a lot of parameters that we can design for the different environments, like for development, testing, and productions. Okay, and what does it mean? Many times we have a code and then we have a lot of parameters in the code. Okay, so if we want to change any parameter, if we want to change the value of any parameter in web.xml, weblogic.xml, or any other file, what we need to do is we have to go again for the deployment again. That means we have to extract the file, we have to then we have to modify the file, then we have to make the archive of that file, and again we have to go for the redeployment of the new file. Even we have a changes in the small descriptor in the archive file, we have to completely go with the same process to one deployment, and then create the we have to then modify the XML file, okay, and then again create the archive file, var, EA, or whatever it is, okay, and again we will go for the deployment, right? But deployment plan give you an option where without going for the complete such cycle, such uh, redeploying or the complete code, okay, you just change the particular value of a parameter instead of complete redeployment and changing your archive file again. And that is the beauty of your deployment file, where you just need to deploy a single descriptor file instead of the redeployment of the code, instead of the redesigning of the code, okay, and then undeploy the code ER var file and then again go for deployment. So you don't need to go for that one. With the deployment plan, you just update the deployment plan along with the application which is already deployed there. It will reflect the new configurations. And deployment plan resides outside of an application archive file, okay, and contain deployment properties that override the application existing parameter which is in the application descriptor. That means it is a separate file, okay, which will be deployed separately apart from your application archive file, okay. And apart from that, what it does is it will override the value which is defined in your code file. For example, I have a code, okay, and there are certain descriptors which I need to modify according to my different environments, like one for development, second for testing, and third for production. Okay, so I have one choice. I can create a 3 copies of my code file, and then I change those parameters according to development, testing, and production, and then I go for separate deployment. That means I have three versions of my code: one for development, second for testing, and third for production. And every time I have to do any changes, every time I have to go for the redeployment of the application in all 3 environments by changing the application context in the code, right? But with deployment plan, you don't need to change the application code. So this would be a generic for all your development, testing, and production environment. But only what you need to do is you just need a deployment plan, modify the value in the deployment plan, and then just redeploy the deployment plan. So what it does is that whatever the values defined in your code, it will override that value with that code, right? So it will supersede the value which is defined in your archive file or in your code file. And that is the reason you don't need to change your code files every time. Okay, you just need to change the deployment file. Okay, so to generate this plan file, there is a utility from Weblogic that is called weblogic.plan generator. Okay, this is you can use to develop your this plan file for a particular archive file, and then after that you can modify this file and then you can deploy it along with your archive file. Okay, and so now you have clarity on the descriptors and now the benefits of deployment plan. Okay, I will just show you a small example. How does it work? Okay. So I will give an example of my application. Suppose I have a HR application, okay, which is I have deployed in my managed servers, and my var file name is hrapp.var, okay. And the context of my application, context in the sense when I will access my application on the browser, I will give my host name :port of my managed server / then the context of my application, which is HR app. This context we defined in our code configuration files, how the user will access the application. That is called a context of your application. So in this case, the context of my application is HR app. That means I am accessing my application with the help of /HR app context. So now what I will do is I will change the context of my application with the help of deployment plan without changing the code. So as of now, this context is defined in my application inside my code. That means inside the XML file, configuration file, which is bundled in my hrweb.var file, which I have deployed in my WebLogic server. So this is the context of my web application, which is /HR app. Okay, so now what I will do, I will generate a plan file with the help of weblogic.plan generator utility. The syntax is Java, weblogic.plan generator, P and G in capital, case sensitive, then hyphen all and the name of my code file, which is hrapp.var. So it will generate a plan.xml file. Okay, now open that file, and the first is locate the following variable, which is defined in this particular screenshot, which is the true value xsi colon nil equal to true. Okay, so what you need to do is you have to remove this value, okay, with the new context that you want to do for application. As of now, I am accessing my application as an /hrf. Now I want this application to be accessed as /hr. So replace this value with the /hr. That means the new context. This is the first replace that you are doing in the file. And second, again, scroll down and then look for the variable -assignment tag. Okay, inside that you have to add a new tag that is called operation. Okay, so what you are going to do mention in the operation is replace. So when you will mention the replace, that means it will override the context href, which is defined in my code, with the /hr, which I am defining in this particular plan file. Okay, so this is you need to add. Now save the file. Okay, so as I said, this will override the context which is defined in my code. So that means I don't need to rebuild my code. I don't need to undeploy my file and then redeploy my new file. What I'm going to do is I will just deploy my code with the help of this deployment plan, and then I will access my application with the help of HR context. So I have generated the plan file. I have modified the values that I have shown to you in the previous slide, right? And this is a deployment of my file, right? So click on your update application, just select your application, click on update. After that, click on change path for your deployment plan. Okay, the first one is showing a source path of your my war file. Second, you have to click on the second option, which is the deployment plan path. Okay, and then you can select the location of your plan file wherever you have saved your plan.xml file, which you have modified just some time back. Okay, and then it will show you the option. You have to select the redeploy the application using the following deployment file. That means it will redeploy your application which is already there using this deployment plan file. Okay, and once it is deployed, just try to access the application with the help of /hr context, and it will be accessible. So now in the previous slide, you saw that my application was deployed as a context/hrf. I have created a deployment plan file where I have modified the few things just to override the context of my application, and now it is accessible as HR without going to undeploy my application and then changing in the code and then again go for the deployment of my application. So thanks for joining this video and stay tuned for a few more interesting videos.